The next situation we're going to be covering is called splits. A split is essentially a move that a player can make if they would like to take their 2 cards and split them into 2 hands, almost like 2 separate players. In order to perform this action, the player has to have, on the first 2 cards, they have to be of the same value. So a king and a jack, they can split those, even though they shouldn't. A jack and a 10, they can split them. An 8 and an 8, a 6 and a 6, a 4 and a 4, they can split those. However, a 5 and a 6, different values. You can't split those. But a 2 and a 7, can't split those either. So they have to be the same value, and it should only be in the first 2 cards, unless you're dealing some specialty version of blackjack. In this example, the player ended up getting 2 8s. In blackjack, we have something known as the rule of aces and 8s. This is not a hard and fast rule for the player. This is just something nice to know as the dealer that's part of blackjack basic strategy. Essentially, that means if a player receives 2 aces or 2 8s, the general rule is you should split always. However, consult with your blackjack basic strategy based on where you're going to see if this still applies. Now, the player that received these 2 8s, they want to split. What they have to do is they must match their original bet. They cannot split for less or more in this situation. They have to match the original bet. Similar to the double down requirements we talked about before, we kind of follow the same stuff where we're still keeping the original bet on the dealer's left-hand side. However, because it's a split, we want to create a little bit of space between the two, so that way the cards on each side don't overlap each other. As far as which card goes with which bet, it really doesn't matter. As long as you keep the original bet on the dealer's left, you should be good. However, create enough space and keep the cards in line with their associated bets. Once this is taken care of, we don't have any calls that we have to make. We're going to immediately deliver a card to the one on the dealer's left, which is with the original bet. But before we do that, we want to make sure that the cameras also understand what the player wanted. They wanted to do a split instead of a double down. So to make sure that they understand this, they are going to show 2 fingers, just like this. And that is going to be especially mandatory if they have 2 5s or 2 4s or something along those lines. So that way there's no confusion between double down or split, because they could perform either one if they had 2 5s or 2 4s, something like that. Either way, just make sure if they're doing a double down or a split, just cover your backside. Make sure that you see the hand sign first. The player will make the hand sign, and then we're going to deliver the card. If the player receives another 8, they are allowed to split again. Same requirements, original bet on the dealer's left-hand side, and they must match the original bet in value. If the spots to the side of the player are empty, you can creep into those spots. If you have a neighboring player, do what you can. You can shift these around at will as long as you're not overlapping other players' bets. Once this is taken care of, we can deliver another card to the first empty spot on our left. If the player receives another 8, they can split again. Same requirements as before. Must match the bet. Keep the original bet on the dealer's left-hand side. Then we're going to deliver a card to the very first spot that only has 1 card on our left-hand side. If they receive another 8, they cannot split again. This is something that's going to be important. This is representing the maximum number of hands that a player is allowed to have. 4. They can split a total of 3 times, totaling a maximum of 4 hands. They cannot split again, and we are forced to either just take another card, which we refer to as a hit, stay, or in some cases, they can double down, which we're going to cover in just a second, but they cannot split this again. The player is going to choose to stand on this, which means they're going to wave it off, and then we're going to deliver a card to the next one right here. Keep in mind, once they wave this off, do not wait for them to ask for a card on the next hand. Each hand has to have at least 2 cards. If they're done with the one prior to it, immediately deliver a card to the next one and then wait for their decision. If they wave that off, just deliver another card to the next hand that only has 1 card. This is what we call double down after split. Not all casinos allow this, but this player decided to split, and now they would like to do a double down. Some casinos allow it, some don't. You have to refer to wherever you are going to be auditioning at, or where you're going to be working at or playing at, and ask the dealer or floor person if this is allowed at their casino. Here, we're going to allow it, so we get the practice. This player is showing an 11, and they would like to double down. All the same double down requirements we discussed earlier still apply. So, original bet, down to the table minimum, and anything in between. Original bet on the left-hand side, show a finger, so that way the cameras know what's wanted. And if it's a double down on a hard hand 12 or higher, we're still going to get approval. And if it's a double down for less, we're still going to say double down for less. In this instance, the player decided to do exact same amount. The total of the hand is not hard, 12 and up, so we just deliver the card without saying anything. We want to make sure that all four of these hands do not overlap each other. We want to make sure they have ample space so we know exactly what happened on each individual hand. Once this player decided to double down, they cannot take any more cards, so I'm immediately going to deliver a card to the next hand. The player will stand on that hand, and the player will stand on that hand as well. As far as splits are concerned, that is about it. However, we are going to talk about splitting aces, which is an interesting case. Now we're going to get to splitting aces. Split aces is slightly different than any other normal split. Any other split, if it's 8s, 6s, 7s, 4s, 2s, doesn't matter. The player is allowed to take as many cards as they want until they go over 21, or they're done, or let's say they decide to do a double down if the casino allows a double after split. Then that's what they are allowed to do. If it's split aces, it's one card each. That's it. It's kind of like a double down, but they don't put any additional money up except to perform the split. Let me show you. This player received 2 aces, and they would like to split. So here's my question for you. If a player decides to split, are they allowed to split for less? No. A split is even money. It has to match the original bet. Double downs are where you can double for less, but in no case are you allowed to double for more, but in splits you cannot double for less. It has to be the same. Or split for less, I'm sorry. So the player put up the money, and I'm going to follow the same procedure I did before when we were talking about splits. I'm going to signal to the players that I would like to see them with 2 fingers, just so that way the cameras know that that's what they want to do. After they give me those 2 fingers, I'm going to deliver the cards. Split aces, like I said before, 1 card each, and we're going to lay them at a 45 degree. It doesn't matter which 45 it really is. Your casino will tell you exactly how they want it, but there's 2 acceptable forms. I'll show you both. 45 in this manner, and there's also 45 in a slightly different manner that looks like this. Either one is technically correct. However, your casino has their own house rules, and they'll tell you exactly how they want that placed. And some casinos don't really care, as long as it's at a 45 in some manner. My big tip, it doesn't matter which one you do for the most part, just make sure they're consistent. Don't do one way and then one the other. Try to keep it the same. And then usually, there's not going to be any issues regarding that. After a player receives those, they are not allowed to resplit in most casinos. They're not allowed to double down. They're not allowed to take an additional card. They are done. It's 1 card, that's it. Now, an interesting thing about what we have currently is the first one right here that looks very similar to a blackjack, but it is not a blackjack. If this hand wins, it's just going to receive even money, and that's it. The reason it's not a blackjack is because if you remember when I was covering blackjacks in this video series, we were talking about a blackjack is only in the first 2 cards that the player receives. Because the first 2 cards this player received was 2 aces, that means that this is not a blackjack. It's what we were just referred to as a 21. Blackjacks get paid 6-5 or 3-2, whatever the table is at the time, and 21s are just even money if they win. Now I know this section has a ton of information, and no instructor is going to be expecting you to know this right off the bat after watching this video. This is just a quick overview Just so that way, while you deal, assuming that you're dealing in a school, we can just kind of remind you of certain things, letting you know, hey, you forgot about this, hey, original bet on the left, so on and so on. And hopefully that will help you remember all those little details as you continually get critiqued over time. Make sure that you take time to re-review this video, as there's a lot of information here that most people continually forget, but watching it over and over again will help embed it in your brain. So hope this was helpful, and we're going to move on to the next one.